This is Crew Tales, Life in the Circus. In the motion picture world, there are an army of dedicated professionals who work behind the scenes to make the movies and shows we watch today. I'm Brad Hodson, and I've spent over 30 years in the motion picture industry. This podcast celebrates the people who make the magic behind the scenes. Todd Williams, welcome to the Circus.
Thank you very much for having me.
Todd, director of photography, describe in your own words what you do.
Had a bunch of podcast interviews. People ask me what I do, and my general answer is I'm a mind reader and an ego manager on set, along with being, interested in the creative portion of it.
Occasionally put a light up?
Yeah, set a shot. But you have to, in my mind, you got to be able to, I like, after working for 2 years as a camera trainee and being on a bunch of sets some of them were a little crazier than others. And I was determined that when I was going to be a DP, that the shows that I worked on were a lot more sane. And it also, I think it allows me, if you're too distracted on set, there's a lot of times where you can be super creative, and those will just disappear if you're not focused enough, or there's not a good energy on set.
Right.
So one of my main missions is on the sets that I'm running is to have that, so that not only can I come up with something creative, but the camera operators can, and the director can, and whoever, other departments, everybody's got energy that they can focus on the creative side of the job, because a lot of what we do is more about math. How many hours do you have? How many minutes do you have left before lunch or the day's over? And if you get that, taking control of most of your thoughts, then there's tons of creative moments on set where you can, even if it's just minor adjustments to a shot or adding a prop into, or a set deck piece or something like that. I like working with, great operators that are super creative. It's always nice to have, for me, it's one of the things I like about film is that you're working with a team, and it seems like I don't need to be the only person making all the decisions, and especially when it comes to creative, it's cool that you can come up with an idea, and then you've got 6 other people on set that all have very amazing skills in different jobs, and all of that comes together, and then suddenly the end result is way more elaborate, or way more creative, or way more innovative than anything that I might have been able to come up with.
Right.
Yeah.
It's funny you should talk about outside of the realm of director of photography, which traditionally is setting the look of the movie, basically, without getting into too much detail on that.
Right.
But you're talking about time management, ego management. As a camera operator, I love the fact that when they call wrap, I go home and I can shut off.
Yeah.
As a director of photography, as essentially the head of the department, the camera department, that doesn't happen. It's 24/7. You have meetings, you have discussions.
I get texts sometimes at 1 a.m. from directors, and they expect that you're going to respond to it.
Right.
And which is cool. And there's a couple in particular that I've worked with for 20 years, and that's the relationship that we have. And a lot of times that's when, you bounce ideas off of each other, and sometimes it's, a one-line text at 1 a.m, and suddenly the next day you've got 30 people building a set based on that note.
Wow.
And it's always, for me, it's always cool, because, it opens the door to allowing us to be super creative. And it's, sure, we're, in charge of, the look of the show, but it's when it comes to directors, I like working with directors that are super collaborative and are fine with, me suggesting ideas. And even sometimes, even if you've got one look to the show, sometimes finding something that's just, you break the rule every once in a while, and that helps solidify, the look that you've created. Just because, every once in a while there's a shot that if you just strictly went by whatever rules that you had created, you would be like, oh, we can't do that. And it's like, sure, you can do whatever you want.
Right.
And at the end of the day, if it works, that's always, for me, that's always the big thing. Like, I mean, you can use the most elaborate, newest gear. You can, it's always fun. Like my thing when I go to the rental house, when I'm in prep, my big thing is going into the back room, and the joke is whatever box has the most dust on it, that's the thing I want to test, because nobody's used it in 30 years. And usually it was created to do a certain thing a certain way, and a lot of times if you use it incorrectly, and it comes up with something that nobody's done, and it works perfectly for the show that you're doing. But it is like literally just going in, it's like, oh yeah, this thing, I haven't seen this ever, or I haven't seen this in 20 years. And then getting out on the test floor and playing around with it, just making mistakes on the prep floor. And a lot of times, that's the stuff that you're just like, that's exactly how we want to use it. And if you went through the manual, in the manual it would say, do not use this way, and you're like, that's what we want to do.
Right. You could find a look that maybe either you're looking for, or a look that might suddenly suit something, and you can use it within the creative process.
Yeah, and it also opens the door, in my mind, for communication, because like, especially with the directors, because a lot of times the directors, like, you can start off with something, and sometimes it's the problem with having almost too many references, is that you get tied into a look that somebody else may have done, and they may have come up with that look for different reasons, even though nobody actually knows sort of the true reason why that thing was created. You can start discussing, like, it's like, oh, or if you're talking to the production designer and they're like, we want this to be a light blue, and it was like, okay, what does that mean? Is that like robin's egg blue? Is that more like, sort of like, some people say this is green, or sometimes some people think this is sort of more of a blue. That just figuring out where people's heads are at creatively. Can somebody visualize something? And then if you're doing something on the prep floor with a piece of gear that you haven't used, and you start messing around with it, a lot of times you will stumble onto something. Like there's that, I'm pretty sure it's Conrad Hall that came up with the term happy accident. When they were doing In Cold Blood, they were in between setups, and they had a light. One electric was moving the light, and he walked by, it was on, and he walked by a window that they had rain on it, and that rain landed on a stand-in's face, and that's how he came up with the idea of using that light to light Robert Blake's face, and it looks like there's tears coming down on his face.
Right.
And that stuff, you will never find that, I don't think, or a lot of times you wouldn't, unless you're doing something. And a lot of times it's either, people might call it a mistake, or, using a piece of gear incorrectly, but you just, like, that's what the prep floor is for, is testing stuff out, putting things in front. And a lot of times you're just like, nope. And then every once in a while you'll do one thing and you're like, well, that sounds crazy. And then you look at the monitor or you look at the playback and you're like, this is exactly it. And if you were looking at a behind the scenes shot of, that you had a piece of crystal in front of the lens and a piece of gaffer tape on it, and you were shooting water on it from a spray bottle or whatever it is, the image you're looking at in the show or the movie, you have no idea what you're looking at. It has an effect to it that is exactly what it's an emotion that you're trying to get across. And it's almost impossible to, I think, or I can't really explain a lot of the stuff. You just have to see it. And sometimes it's a cool look, and you try it on a shot when you're on set and you're just like, "Man, it doesn't work for the scene that we're doing or the story that we're telling. It worked for something else perfectly, but it doesn't work for this. So if you adjust it a little bit, it is slightly different, and then because of that adjustment, it works perfectly for what you're trying to get across."
Right. Yeah. Like the old folklore we've heard in film for years. I heard anyway that the original Blade Runner.
Yeah.
You talk to some of the technicians who worked on that show, and this is a alleged story. I don't know whether it's true or not.
Yeah.
It probably is. Where during shooting they're moving gels and shaking gels during takes and moving mylar to get a certain kind of shimmy look. And they couldn't understand why they were doing that back then, but there was a reason for it.
Yeah.
And it was something that was just discovered to give that moving light look that it was so famous in that movie.
Yeah. Well, I mean, I always love watching or looking at behind the scenes footage or stills, and because if you look at what the crew are doing, it sometimes looks completely insane, and then you look at the shot and you're just like, this looks amazing. And but if you just based it on the setup that you have in front of the camera, you'd be like, well, this is never going to work. And you're like, yeah, it does.
Right. So you can kind of create on the fly.
Yeah.
Todd, tell me how you got to where you are in your career. Early beginnings. What influenced you to get into film, and what influenced you to get into director of photography?
Well, I started out being an extra on some shows. One show that I did was The Boy Who Could Fly, and I was in the final sequence where they had this cable rig and they had a stunt guy on it, and he flew through the audience and people were diving out of the way. And I was standing with a bunch of other kids in this midway thing, and around me were all these stunt guys flying over stuff. And I thought this was the coolest thing. And then I had seen I wasn't a huge Star Wars fan, but Raiders of the Lost Ark I loved. And what I loved even more than Raiders was the behind the scenes making of Raiders, where you watching the guys in the desert doing the car stunt or the truck stunt. And I thought I wanted to be a stunt guy. And I was in karate, and one of the guys somehow knew somebody about an hour away who was running a stunt school. And I went to it, and they were completely insane and didn't know what they were doing. And they told us the one Saturday that two stunt guys, local stunt guys, were coming the next week to talk to them. One of them was Jacob Rupp and the other was Tony Morelli. And I knew Tony Morelli because he was like a kickboxing champion. And then I'd seen or read articles about Jacob Rupp because I think he was in First Blood and a bunch of other shows at the time. And so he came, they both came. I wasn't there. And the guy that ran the thing the next week said, oh yeah, they loved it. And at the time, there was the white pages. And when I went home, I found Jacob's number in the white pages, called him and said, hey, I'm in the school. And he cut me off right away. And he said, get out of there right now. He goes, whatever you paid. He goes, you should get out of there because you're going to get hurt. They don't know what they're doing. And I was like, well, could I come and train with you? And he goes, well, what are your stats? And at the time, I was the same height. I was 17 or 18. So I was 6'3", but I was 145 pounds. And at that point, he just cut me off and he said, look, first of all, you're 6'3". So at this point, you're not going to be stunt doubling a lead actor. You're going to need to stunt double a bad guy. And there are no 6'3", 145 pound bad guys in movies right now. So he's like, go train, get your black belts, go to the gym, get to like 180 pounds. And I started doing that and then my attention span lasted probably about 2 months. And then I watched the documentary again, and I was like, hey, there's a camera department in here. These guys look like they're traveling around the world. This looks kind of cool. And so I started, I went to Rogers TV, and for 2 years I shot soccer games and lacrosse games and put together a demo reel, and I got into a CEGEP in Montreal, and I went for a year there, and that year got me into Concordia, a film program, and that's how I started. And then once I graduated Concordia, I happened to luck out because there was a master's student who was from Guyana, and he had written a feature and was going back and needed a cinematographer, and I got the job of shooting it. And so my first job was 3 months on the road in Guyana, up 8 hours upriver in a Amerindian village, shooting with 16 millimeter film. And I was like, this is it. This is all I want to do. So cut to a couple of years later, right now, and that is all I've done.
Right.
Yeah. So I was hooked.
You kind of got fast tracked then. Just all of a sudden you're in film school and then off to Guyana.
I did, and then I came back to Vancouver. I had I got a job through a friend that I had, when I was in Concordia, or before I got into Concordia, I worked on an independent feature that Michael Belfry was DPing, and I didn't know him. And anyhow, we met at that point, and then he left to come to Vancouver. And it was 2 years later, I went back to Vancouver, and again with the white pages, found Michael's name and number and called him, and he said he was working at a music video company and they needed a gaffer, and I'd never gaffed, and he said, "Can you gaff?" And I said, "Sure, I can." And next thing I know, I'm gaffing small music videos that had gear in a white panel van, and everything was plugged into house power. And but the music videos were actually the videos that they play when you sing karaoke, and they put the words in front.
Right.
So I did that for about 6 months. I got into the union as a trainee and decided I wanted to go through that and camera assisting so I could work on bigger shows and work with guys that had worked on, movies that I loved. And so I walked away from, shooting independent stuff or lighting independent stuff to get into the union and for 12 years, I was a second assistant and worked on a bunch of commercials and second units. And in between jobs, I was out shooting everything that I could.
Right. That's kind of a common theme, myself included. A lot of people kind of learned on the job. They found their way in. I myself was a PA, and you just kind of look around and you go, where do I want to go?
Yeah.
People are usually quite receptive to that. It's like, well, if you want to do that, you need to do these courses or whatnot. But a lot of it was, in my time, just they'll take you on and they'll train you on site. And as much as film schools can be certainly helpful, a lot of people got their start just from knowing people and asking them to show them the ropes, as it were.
Yeah.
What are some of the more memorable projects you've worked on, Todd?
There's a couple in particular. Documentaries is what I started shooting, and I went to Ireland 3 times for a St. Patrick's documentary. We were in the middle of the 1999 St. Patrick's Day parade in Dublin. And then we went back in July for the hike up Crowpatrick, and me and the director hiked up halfway, spent the night in a tent, and then we climbed the rest of the way. And there was a French camera crew with a helicopter buzz bombing the mountain, shooting stuff. And we probably had a dozen locals come up and ask us if we were part of that crew. And we said no. And then they looked, we had backpacks, and at the time we had a 60 millimeter camera and box of lenses and all this stuff. And they all started freaking out because they were just like, how did you get up here? And we're did you take the helicopter? And he was like, no, we climbed up here. And everybody, I think they would have thrown us off the mountain if we had have been dropped off with the helicopter, but because we had actually climbed up with the gear, they were cool with us. And they also thought we were nuts. And then we went back in November with an actor, and he walked around the standing stones, and we shot all this black and white film footage of him to make it look like a movie that had been shot in the 30s or 40s. There was another documentary that I spent 6 weeks on Easter Island, and I still have friends from that job. Me and the camera assistant used to go into a local bar at Rap every night and have drinks, and the bartender is still a friend of mine from years ago.
Oh.
Yeah. So, another documentary, I went to Israel for 5 weeks and toured around and shot interviews at the time. Luckily, there was like a ceasefire at the time, so it was a fairly calm time to be there. It was an amazing place, though. We were in Tel Aviv mostly, but then we went up to Eilat and Sardot, and so a lot of the documentaries. I just did 2 years ago. I did 7 months in Budapest on a TV series, and anything that's got travel involved with it, I will be on a plane and gone. And that's, I mean, from minute one, that is literally what got me hooked. Even just watching the behind the scenes documentary of all the Raiders of the Lost Ark, those guys are flying all over the world.
Right.
I was just like, this seems like the coolest job in the world.
Right.
And you get to blow stuff up and do fun stuff. And so, yeah, those are the main jobs. Yeah. Those are probably the biggest things so far.
Wow.
Yeah.
And what do you do outside of the film industry? You have other I want to say talents, but also other hobbies.
Right. Well, funny you ask. We happen to have a spread of 2 different wines that went the strike on. Me and a buddy got creative and decided to make cherry wine, and the thing that everybody seems to have a hard time believing that we made banana wine, which is this right here.
Brilliant. I've never tried banana wine, but I've heard many good things about it. So live, here we go.
Cheers.
Let's give it a try. I've been waiting for this moment. Wow, that's actually really good.
Yeah.
I never would have thought in a million years that a banana wine would
taste like that.
It's hard, like it's a real subtle note. You barely even smell or have any idea. You have to be told it's banana wine to really know it, but it definitely has a unique taste, doesn't it?
Yeah. Yeah. Everybody has had sort of the same reaction, that everybody's prepared for it to be like some super sweet wine, and it's not.
It is really good. And along with this, you've been doing some work with some pretty high-end chefs.
Right.
And so this kind of ties in with some of this winemaking, right?
Yeah. Well, I had the luxury of shooting 2 weeks in the kitchen at Le Crocodile in Vancouver after Chef Michel's 41 years of work. We were there for his last week, and got introduced to, I'd never been to the restaurant, but just watching the staff in the kitchen and the front line staff, just the service that they supplied and all the detail that they had with how they presented the food, how they treated the customers, watching in the kitchen, how the food was also prepared. And just, it was for me, it was a cool event. And one of the best parts of it is like clockwork every night at 8:30 in between the first and second sitting, where I'd be standing there with the camera and the chef would walk over and ask me if it's red wine time. And I was like, of course it's red wine time. And so he would wave to the sommelier and the sommelier would come in with a glass of wine. So I'd be standing there filming for, like 20 minutes while I'm drinking with one hand and the camera's in the other hand.
Wow.
Yeah.
And my understanding is you had the sommelier or a sommelier actually give some of your wine a taste.
Yeah. Her review, everybody, it was funny because every time I just sit and look at people's faces while they're tasting it, because you can see everybody's being very polite and they're preparing themselves for it to be horrible homemade wine. And once
do you tell them first that it's banana wine?
I do. Yeah. I think the next time I'm not going to tell them that, but everybody knew for sure. And once you could see like a light bulb going off and everybody liked it. And
we're talking high end people with not just people that can drink anything. These are people that have tasted a lot of high end wines, right?
Yeah. Yeah. It's the sommelier's note was, there are no false notes in your wine.
Damn.
And she's like, for a homemade wine, and it was literally made in a 5-gallon bucket in a kitchen.
And you didn't filter it?
No, did not filter it. No, it sat for a couple months for sure.
So that's pretty new wine. So the fact that you got a good note on it, because usually wine needs some time to kind of settle in. And
at that point, I think it was about 4 months that it had been sitting in the bottle. So, but that's it.
That's nothing for a wine, right?
Yeah,
that's incredible.
And this is the cherry wine.
Okay. And describe that process. Was it?
It's very close. The banana wine was more of a science experiment because my friend who has made fruit wine before had made cherry wine. So that that process he'd already done. And I was the one who was like, look, if we're going to, he called and said, because the film strike was on at that point, and he's like, we should come down and make wine. And I was like, okay. So I was like, well, if we're going to make wine, we should make something. I haven't made anything, so we should make something neither one of us had made. And I went and did a bit of a deep dive on YouTube and found people that had made banana wine. And I was like, we should make banana wine. So he politely made it with me. And I was in Europe asking him for updates, and he kept saying that it was good. And then when we finally went to bottle it, that's when he broke it to me that he goes, I'm concerned that this is not going to be very good.
Really?
And I was like, oh, now you tell me.
I just bought 40 pounds of banana.
Yeah. So we had made, and so we poured a glass and we tasted it, and his face is exactly the same face that everybody else that has tasted. He goes, oh my God. He said, I think this is actually the best fruit wine that I've ever made. Yeah. And I was like, and then we were like, did you write any of this down? I was like,
yeah, what's the rest? We're going to do this again.
Yeah.
All right, here we go. First time cherry wine.
Yeah. This is also really good with cigars.
Oh, okay. Well, we'll do that for the next episode.
Yeah.
Yeah. You know, it's funny because I couldn't put my finger on it. If you said, try this and tell me what you think, I would have said, well, that's a different tasting grape wine.
Yeah.
It tastes different.
Yeah.
It tastes really good.
Yeah.
But you definitely know it's not your average grape style wine. So It's nice knowing what it is to go into it, but it is really nice.
Yeah. It's lighter than, and I mean, the ironic thing is that I drink wine a little bit, but not very much.
Yeah. It is light.
Yeah.
It's almost, it's a really nice light red for sure.
But it reminds me of the, what are those cigars with the plastic tip on it? The
Colts.
Yeah.
Oh.
And they have the cherry.
That's true.
And when you're smoking cigars with this, that's what it reminds me of.
Fair enough.
Yeah.
Wow.
I don't know if that's a selling point or not, but.
Well, in these days, maybe not so much.
Yeah.
I mean, I don't know how many people smoke cigars anymore.
Mm.
Moving on to what you do in your spare time.
Mm-hmm.
Tell us a little bit about this piece behind us.
This is one of the paintings that I started doing. I was on a show for 5 years called Legends of Tomorrow. And in between season 1 and season 2, I had taken a trip to Santiago, Chile, and then LA, and also New York. And each of those cities, I had gone to a bunch of art galleries. And every once in a while, especially when you go into the abstract section, that little voice in your head goes, I could do this. And that happened every time. And I got back to Vancouver, and I had 6 or 7 weeks before season 2 started. And I had traveled so much, I was like, I got to do something. And then I was like, oh, well, I went online. I found a painting class, and I took a 1-night, 2-hour painting class. And I went out the next day and I bought paints and I started painting. And when we started prep, I would come home and I would paint at night. And I started realizing that whatever that switch is for turning work off, the second that I started painting, it would click it and I would forget work. So once we started shooting, I started coming home at midnight, 1 a.m, 2 a.m, and I started painting. And I did that every night for the entire season. And it was mostly a way to decompress. And I just started randomly posting pictures on Facebook and Instagram, and people seemed to like it. And then it took about 2 months, and then people started saying, when are you selling your stuff, or when are you having a gallery show?
After 2 months.
Yeah. And I was like, most of the people I'm connected to on Facebook are connected some way, one way or another, with film. So like, I call them, most of the people are sort of work friends. And I was like, oh, the people are being very polite about this.
But still creative people, Todd, right?
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah.
And then it took about 2 months. And then I was like, there's about 6 or 8 paintings that I was like, I think these are actually pretty good. And then it just kept going. And I contacted a friend in April of that year, who I'd gone to high school with, and he produces art shows and photo shows. And I said, I'm thinking of having a gallery show. And I went down and we sat down and talked, and I showed him my work, and we went down to the Charlie Rosso Gallery that day. And I booked myself a night in August. And a year and a month after I started painting, I had my gallery show in Vancouver.
Unbelievable.
And the whole, and it's still, like, it blows me away that, I just randomly sort of stumbled into it, but it's just, it literally clicks that switch off of work. It could be a 14-hour day, insane day of second unit on set, out in rain towers, and in 4 seconds of painting, it's all gone. And sometimes I would start painting at 1 a.m, and I would stop and I'd realize it's 3:30 in, and I still have to get up the next day to go to work. So
right.
I literally just crawled into bed and went to sleep. But for me, it was, I just started doing it. And, but the effects from it, I thought were super cool. And then it's last year with the strike on, I sent paintings to galleries in London, which I got in. And so every month for a year, I had, they had an opening the first week of every month. And I had paintings in the Boomer Gallery in London. And then I also got into a gallery in Rome, and I got into a gallery in Zurich over there. So I went in May for 2.5 weeks. And then I went back in September, and I was gone for almost 7 weeks, and just kept traveling around to the gallery shows.
That's an incredible story, considering how short a time you've been painting.
Yeah, well, the other at the and I had the gallery show in Vancouver. The other thing that I did with it is that there was a painting on the wall, and then there was a number beside it. And if you went to another wall, there was still frames from the episode of the TV show that I was shooting, and you could take a look. And not that I had thought about it, but when I started looking at the colors in the painting that I had done, and you look at the episode, they're super connected. They're the exact same colors that we were using in the lighting. And I hadn't even realized that until I started putting together the show, that it was very connected.
Subconsciously in your head. That's crazy.
Yeah. So
this might be a broad question, but what's next for you? Are you thinking of maybe taking up rocket science just as a lark?
Yeah, could be. Yeah.
It sounds like you'd be good at it in a couple of years.
Yeah.
So just
It's it's always cool to, like, it would be the wine thing people seem to really like it. We're going to see if we can push that a little further. Yeah, I mean, it's always interesting to get into doing, something that's outside of film. It would, in general, I've always wanted to start a side company, but I mean, that could be a million different things.
Right.
I would love to get a car and restore a car, which I haven't. I don't have the space to do that. That's probably the biggest reason why I haven't done that.
Right.
Yeah, nothing solid right now, but yeah, I mean, the door is open for wine. I seem to literally trip into that, and we just seem people seem to really like the banana wine, and I think there's something to it.
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah,
I'll segue into this, and I ask almost all of my guests,
sure,
any advice to anyone, and it doesn't necessarily have to be who want to get into film. Clearly, anyone wants to get into art or winemaking, but
right.
It sounds like particularly with you, and I'm pretty astounded at all the guests I've had, the diversity outside of film that my fellow filmmakers do, the things that they do outside of film, and I'm usually shocked. I had no idea.
Right.
What would you suggest to people who want to get into film or otherwise?
Well, the one piece of advice that I got when I was starting out was somebody who was in film, but they didn't know anything about camera or lighting or gripping or anything, but they just said, look, whatever it is you want to do, I was like, track down the people that are the best in the industry, or that you like whatever they're doing, and do whatever it takes to go train with them. I mean, and because those are the people that are going to give you your basis for whatever it is that you want to do. And that's why I spent 2 years in the trainee program, because I wanted to work on bigger shows, and I knew if I just kept shooting, I could have just kept being a cinematographer, but I was only going to be working on certain size things, at least at that point in my career.
Right.
As a second, once I got out being a trainee, I was working on second units on feature films that were like, 20, 30, 40, $50 million movies, which I would have never had a chance to shoot. And I got to work on commercials. Like, I got to work under Harris Savides, who was amazing and super gracious, was constantly talking about things that he had done. Like, he did the opening credits for Seven with the shaky letters, and he was explaining exactly how he did that. And for me, that was the whole point of being a camera assistant. And I literally sat, after I had finished loading film, in the middle of the shoot day, and I had a notebook, and I would sketch out lighting plans and sets, and write down the kind of light that we were using, what diffusion was going on,
a little cheat sheet for you.
Yeah, and if I could ever figure out or hear what the exposure was, or what the the meter reading for the light was, that I would mark that stuff down too. So I basically, it was like getting a master class in cinematography.
Yeah.
And also, the other thing too is just watching how people like Harris, like, even when things went sideways on set or whatever, how he handled it, how he dealt with it. And I've worked mostly with people that were super amazing, and I'm just like borrowing all of what I saw on set, how they handled themselves, and occasionally worked on shows where I'm like, I won't be doing this, I won't be doing that.
Yeah.
So, but yeah, I had a collection of DVDs of movies, and I got to work with a lot of the guys that had shot those films, and a lot of that was in commercial world too. So,
right.
Yeah.
What I found remarkable, particularly in our department, camera department, is it's almost like the more popular, the more accomplished you find these people, the more willing they are to be receptive. So part of what you're saying for advice to people is don't be afraid to approach these people, because 9 out of 10 times I've found they are very approachable, and they're willing to share their information and mentor anyone around them.
Yeah, I worked on a Nickelback video, How You Remind Me, with Claudia Miranda. It was the first time I had watched a DP use a digital camera, and then he would take it, and he had a little printer, and he would spit out a proof, and based on his exposure from the digital cameras, what he would set his film camera at. And probably at least 4 years later, I wrote him an email and explained who I was. And I was about to go shoot a show with the Vipers, and he had just finished shooting, I forget what show it was, with the Vipers. And I asked him a bunch of questions technically about the Viper. And he wrote me back like 2 pages of email description of what he had done and things that he liked about it, what he wouldn't do with that camera. And just, he was, and, I mean, at that time he was doing great stuff. He, and now I'm sure he's equally, and his website too had trailers for movies that he had shot, and then commercials that he was on. And then there was also all these little behind the scenes things, like when he was showing how they were testing lenses or filters for those commercials to get certain looks. Like it was like a magician giving away a lot of his trick on his webpage. Yeah. And when I straight out just sent him an email, he, like, within a day, he wrote me back, and it was like this super detailed thing about how he used the camera and what settings he had.
That's brilliant. That's so good to hear.
Yeah, it was amazing.
Well, Todd, with that, I want to thank you for coming out. Yeah. Thank you for sharing all your thoughts, and thank you for sharing your wine.
Yeah, no problem.
Thanks for being on board.
Thank you.
Well, that about wraps it up for another episode of Crew Tales, Life in the Circus. I'd like to thank our producers Dustin Schwinnard and Dustin Girton, as well as our technical producer Rob Hunt. I'm Brad Hodson. Thank you for joining us.